the number one security risk right now is ransomware. The number of breaches we have seen recently has been alarming, and the number continues to grow. Ransomware is big business. So today, we're going to talk about how to survive an attack. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to another Future Tech video podcast. The audio version of the podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most of the others. Or you can find it at futr.buzzsprout.com. Today, we are talking with Andrew Miller, who is a subject matter expert on ransomware for Pure Storage. He's been on the front lines helping companies put meaningful protections in place to address these threats. So we're going to talk to him about what he's seeing in the wild and what strategies can work to help companies weather this storm. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks, Chris. Sandesh, thanks so much for having me today. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this one. This is top of mind for so many people, so I think this is a very timely conversation.
To your comment earlier, when I first started talking about this 5 or 6 years ago, I had no idea that, we're in the middle of 2021. I'd still be talking about it even more than I was back then. So, and that's not a good thing. I think we all know that, but so it's happened.
Yeah. Well, before we get into all of that, tell me a little bit about who you are. What's your personal story? Where'd you come from?
Yeah, no, happy to. I live in the Southeast, and so maybe I'll keep it a little bit work focused. Aside from the fact that I love to play ping pong and long walks on the beach, and all that kind of stuff that doesn't matter too much. But from a technology standpoint, started on the customer side for about 7 years, admin to engineer to architect, everything from storage to networking to virtualization, VI3, DRS and HA, and you go back, you still I haven't lost my technical soul over the years, try not to. 8 years on the partner side, so kind of SE to manager director. That's where you make promises on the whiteboard. If they come true, you get to come back. If not, not so much. It's awkward, right? It's been a couple years actually building out a technical marketing team for a startup in Silicon Valley. So was out there about a week or two a month in Palo Alto. Hired 12 folks in 2 years. Learned a lot, which is also a code word for those were a crazy 2 years, kind of thing. And now I've been at Pure for about 2.5 years in kind of a technology overlay role. It's a director role without direct reports, where I focus on East enterprise companies and partners, et cetera. But then also there's various special projects such as cloud and ransomware and flash stack and some other things that actually I think on all of our day jobs we work together a little bit on. But one of those has been continuing to talk about ransomware because for better or worse, it's this very interesting intersection of psychology, technology, finance. You put all that together, and there's been a continuing little bit of a dark fascination with the topic.
Yeah, on that, you're in the field. You're working with customers. You've got customers are coming to you because they've been attacked, and customers that are worried about being attacked. What are you seeing out in the field in terms of these ransomware attacks and where they're coming from and who they're attacking?
Whew, that's a lot of
big
stuff.
One. Yeah.
I think we're going to unpack that one together for a little while. So lots of stories, lots of ideas, but cool. So diving in. Sometimes where I even start is just a little bit of the base definition, but then to have fun with it, because we know the base definition by now. Encrypt your stuff until you pay money, you don't get it back. Okay, fine. The alternate, maybe a little bit of a snarky definition is, a problem. Ransomware is a problem that requires an unplanned restore of huge amounts of data from systems that just weren't designed for it. Now, there needs to be defense in depth and all this other stuff, but eventually we end up going back to backups often. And so when I was out of college, I was the backup exec admin. And when I went to Tivoli storage manager. And, you got used to that normal sad backup panda every morning, come in, wall of red failed jackup jobs. If anyone asked me, hey, can you restore 50% of the data center really fast from your backups and your data and your systems? I was like, you didn't give me budget for that, or even ever bring it up, So sometimes I'll go the snarky definition path. What I am seeing is often what I'll kind of do is I'll think through and walk through a little bit of the anatomy of an attack,
if you will.
Great. So this is where it was maybe years ago, get in, encrypt stuff right away. Today, the numbers are fuzzy because no one really wants to report this stuff. And you may not be required to if you haven't had actually, compromise of, PII or confidential information, et cetera. But so an attacker gets in. The average attack length, 2018, the numbers that I've seen was 206 days, 2019, 51 days. The numbers are mushy, like we said. Either way, the point is get in and actually do what I used to do on the partner side, where we do like network and application discovery to help with data center migrations and stuff like that. What are all the applications and servers and who talks to what and that kind of thing. Basically, trying to compromise as much as possible. There's some great work, for instance, I can see in my head, there's a walkthrough that Microsoft does of a Ryuk attack chain, where they're getting in, they navigate laterally, they try and get to the point of the holy grail of domain admin credentials, that kind of thing. Because then you got the keys to the kingdom. What shifted then is, so after that point, so there's like the point of infiltration. It can be a while. And then the day before kicking off encryption, we'll often go, now this is now the development within the last couple of years, trying to compromise the means of data protection or recovery. When I was presenting on this up in Toronto at one point, a gentleman came up to me afterwards. And this is now in the category of that it's not necessarily your fault if your machine gets compromised. Like, do good hygiene, but attackers are determined. So he got an email. This gentleman got an email that looked like it was from iTunes, and it was for a $49.99 app. And I hope for none of us on today, like this is make or break money or anyone listening. But at the same time, it's like, what are my wife or my kids? Are like, what, $50 for an app? Come on. The only thing wrong in that email was the dispute this purchase link. And that was, you'd have to go into the view source to see that it didn't go to Apple's website. It takes you to another website. And, hey, the U.S. government put out a 0-day attack alert on Firefox 8 months ago. You click that link because, like, what's this thing? And maybe you're compromised, kind of thing. Okay, so at that point, machine gets compromised. Often humans were the weakest link.
Yeah.
The SQL DBA story that I was going to mention is that machine got compromised. The attackers didn't encrypt right away. They reached out across the network, and then they reached out to a purpose-built backup appliance. I'm going to leave names out because I'm not here to take any kind of competitive pot shots, right? But just somewhere putting SQL dumps, SMB, encrypted all the backups. Then reached out across the network to the MDF and encrypted on the SQL servers, the MDF, LDF files, the actual SQL databases, and then encrypted his machine. So that's the definition of a really, really bad day. Just like thinking about it is like, ooh, that's. We're seeing that at scale now, though. I'm thinking of customers that I've talked with where attackers are going after deleting snapshots on storage systems, trashing backup servers, deleting backups, encrypting backups, and then they go kick off the encryption in mass, right? Not just a couple machines, but a lot of machines. The challenge then becomes is we have to think two things there about, first, if I'm in an incident response mode, I've got to find patient zero. Back to that point of infiltration, and I've got to trace everywhere the attackers got in. There's great companies that help with this. However, there's a second key point in time, which would really be when was the point of encryption? Because if your tier one applications start to go offline, I think we all maybe go back far enough. If I say pager duty, that means something, right?
Yeah.
Saturday morning the pager goes off, kind of thing. So, like if your tier one apps are going offline, you can't take orders, et cetera. You're getting a call about that really fast. You're noticing that within hours or days. And then it's, do I have my data before the point of encryption in a method that's fast enough to restore that I'm not, and I'm just trying to be good here because I'm thinking of a certain case that was absolutely in the news that caused gas shortages in the Southeast. I'm always cautious because some of the stories that I've told in the past about this topic, those people later became Pure customers. And I'm like, I'll use the story, but I'm not going to say your name because I don't want to give you any bad press.
Well, I think I know who you're talking about. And the CEO of that company, Joseph Blount, the CEO of Colonial Pipeline is who I think you may be referring to.
Yeah, I'm not making any claims as far as customership or not, but we help lots of people and we may in the future. So
well, he did an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and he did talk about how at some point they decided to pay the ransom because that was sort of the big story for them. And for him, he specifically mentioned that it was the amount of time it was going to take to recover from this that inspired him to pay the ransom. Now, once he paid the ransom, he found that did not fix everything, and he still had a multi-day outage because even with the encryption keys, it was still problematic to get everything back up and running again, right? So
There was
I think that's another piece of it. We always think, well, we've got backups, right? We'll just restore from backups. And I think, we generally think in terms of restoring a whole data center from backup is your data center is a smoking hole kind of recovery, and you've got a couple weeks to figure it all out, right? Kind of scenario. And, this is basically a smoking hole kind of event, right?
It's a smoking hole kind of event that, for better or worse, often the means that when we usually think about RPO and RTO, how much data have I lost, how long to come back online, that's disaster recovery, business continuity conversations. Ransomware, because it's not an act of God, force majeure, et cetera, there's people trying to take those methods of protection offline and compromise them, often being successful. To your comment about, the interview in the Wall Street Journal, I heard recently the most recent stat is that 42% of ransoms are paid, or 42% of attacks actually end up paying the ransom.
Yeah.
But if we think about it, if you've got limited software development, and everyone plays a zero-sum game when it comes to software development, whether it's ethical people or attackers or not, your optimization cycles are going to go into the attack chain. They're going to go into the speed of encryption. They're not going to go into the tool that helps with decrypting the data, and probably not doing huge amounts of validation and checksums on was it decrypted correctly. So, reading some about Colonial Pipeline, actually, they ended up paying the ransom within a couple hours because I believe, now I'm extrapolating, but I know this from other customers. So we'll do a composite story here for a minute.
Sure.
You get hit, you say, I'm going to start restoring. Even if you've done some good stuff there, that might be days. That's actually not a bad answer historically, to be honest.
Yeah.
But that's not enough to keep you out of the news. So then you go and say, I'm going to pay the ransom. Not recommending this, okay, but my customers may do. Get the decryption tool, and then find the decryption tool might be slower than your recurrent recovery process. It is just sometimes thinking about the ransoms paid versus impact from an organizational, reputational, financial standpoint. So a little bit of numbers, fun numbers. Well, numbers can be fun, but $25 million back in 2015 was the industry-wide impact. That number now in 2020 is somewhere in the 20 billion range kind of thing. And so I was, like I mentioned before, at a company, a startup that, venture capital fueled, grew, 200 employees to 1,300 employees, that kind of thing in 2 years. We were sharing stories before, Chris, I think, about rappers at VMworld and concerts and all that kind of stuff. Okay, fine. 5-6x growth in 2 years. That's crazy. 25 million to 20 billion? That dwarfs any of these growth. And then the flip side is this has become a business. This is an industry. This is an industry with call centers, with post-attack customer satisfaction surveys. Not kidding, kind of thing, right? I have a friend who actually intentionally does a little bit of kind of white hat hacking, got in a VM, and he called into the call center to get support, and a very pleasant conversation with someone willing to help him, walk him through, where you could find the ATMs where you can transact with cryptocurrency, et cetera, that kind of thing. But it's literally a business. There are, for better or worse, we've now got this intersection of kind of two underlying factors. And these ones haven't changed for better or worse. The first is cryptocurrency. So not trying to have political, social, et cetera, kind of step in that. But what it does fundamentally do is it provides a relatively anonymous, relatively reliable means of payment across jurisdictional boundaries. Past subpoenas, et cetera, or maybe even to nations or nation states that may encourage some of this behavior, to be real. And then secondly, you've got ransomware as a service kits out there. So if I say dark web, you'd be like, oh, you just said a buzzword. But there's dark web out there for real. And that's where there are literally kits that some people will go and actually, their business model is around accessing customer environments and then selling the access. Other ones are around writing kits. And that's even where I think it's a little bit of a channel of a value-added reseller model, if you will, solutions integrator model. You've got customers; those are the people that get attacked. You've got the vendors, and you've got the people in the middle that help amplify out and get it out to everybody, kind of thing, with different payment models and different levels of technical competence needed, kind of thing. So it's fascinating to see how it keeps growing at an industry level, and there's some odd parallels when we look at legitimate legal IT software companies.
Maybe we're all in the wrong business. I think first stop for every company should be just to go to the dark web to get a full network map and inventory of all their assets. Perhaps is a good first step. But no, but you do mention that this is big business, and what we're seeing is first of all, there's nation state actors involved in these attacks, and some of these nation states are actually using the money they make off of it to fund operations for other nefarious activities and the things that they're doing. But some of this is just local people in areas of the world that just don't have a lot of economic output, and this is a big economic boost for those local communities, and these people are quite welcomed. Not just they're unwilling to extradite, they're actually really enjoying the benefits of having these people in the community bringing some good money in. So that's a really hard problem to solve for, right?
The one thing, and I left this out. There's so many different stories and pieces here, but we're familiar, and this is what you're referring to. So it reminded me of the idea of outsourcing.
Yeah,
and it may be painful depending on your job or your career, et cetera. But we know the fundamental economic concept of the means of production follows the living costs and skill sets and all that kind of thing. So ransomware is actually following an outsourcing pattern where a $10 or $15 or $20,000 ransom, average software developer salary in the U.S. was around $69,000 a year ago when I looked. So, but maybe if you're in Eastern Europe or India or parts of Asia, wherever, I'm not picking on countries here, but just it's a different cost of living. That might be a couple years of income kind of thing. And what you alluded to earlier is sometimes I make, especially in like lunch and learn scenarios where people have got steak knives and you're trying to keep them happy with cheap jokes. We'll throw in that, hey, if you feel like your career's stalled, you don't know when your boss is going to resign, you should absolutely look at cybersecurity, not whatever else you were thinking of a minute ago when I was leaning into that, so.
Yeah. No, and I know there was just recently big news because Klopp got busted in Ukraine, right? And so that was, you don't typically see, an Eastern European, government like that turning people over on these things. So I wonder how much of a trend that's going to start. I'm not thinking much, but
the number of APT, advanced persistent threat groups, that are state linked or state funded is very high. Or in certain countries, maybe they're not state funded, but they're basically, as long as you don't attack anyone inside our country, we're cool because we don't like the rest of the world. And so as long as you're just causing chaos over there, and like you mentioned, you're bringing income for luxury goods or other stuff into our country, hey, that's basically all goodness kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that's interesting about this too is that I've had some security folks tell me that the thing that's very concerning about this is so much of this activity is actually cover for other things going on underneath it, right? One of the trends that we keep seeing is this data exfiltration piece of it, right? So now there's sort of a two-pronged ransomware attack. One is where your files are being encrypted, and the second piece of that is if you don't pay up, they're slowly, releasing all your stolen data, right? Which is very problematic. But beyond that, what they're doing is when they're causing this level of disruption to an environment and they're wiping logs and all this stuff, it's smokescreen for other things underneath that they're doing within the environment that may be really really undesirable.
I mean, we're all human. We see someone who did something successfully and we say, ooh, that could be me. So you got to believe that people, attackers who look at what happened with SolarWinds and getting in theory, SolarWinds was compromised in 2019, started to go active in March of 2020. They actually had it, compiled into the software and finally discovered, late 2020, December 2020 kind of thing. You can't believe that there aren't other organizations that either are doing that right now and that we don't know about, or that will be doing it kind of thing. There's actually one other thing I wanted to toss in. If
Sure.
someone is listening to this and you care enough to spend time with us, thank you. A little bit of a professional development tip. Go into Google, make a saved search on ransomware, Don't have it email you every time there's a new hit in Google News because your inbox will explode. But actually have it do a daily digest and just click a couple of those links. And it's actually a great way to keep it up to date. Like some of the stories you were just telling, that's what reminded me. I was like thinking like, so where did I see that one? It's like, yep, it was in that daily email that I click a couple stories on and then I file it away kind of thing. So just to kind of highlight, some of the things we just talked about here, that, it's like, I think there's beyond sort of the initial encryption thing, the attacks that we saw. Mm-hmm. And most of that was focused on, personal computers in the beginning and things like that in the early days. Now it's very enterprise focused. But, like you mentioned, they're not just encrypting like your database, they're going encrypting your backups. Sure, because that makes it really hard to recover. But then they're going and encrypting everything else too, which I think is a really interesting point because that makes it harder to recover in a timely fashion, makes them more likely to pay the ransom, right? So they're doing a lot of stuff that that pushes one, incentivizes a company to pay that ransom, which obviously the FBI is saying please don't. But I think everybody is aware of the fact that in some cases you have absolutely no choice, right? The stat there being 42%, and kind of play out that kind of the larger attack scenario. You were joking, but not actually incorrectly, or maybe you knew. So it was like, hey, you're going to tee up the joke about buying network and application discovery. This is actually, now we go into we can go to like personal finance here. You should have diversification of income streams and don't have all your portfolio in one stock, that kind of thing.
Right.
So there's the classic income stream of, get ransoms from people. There's also the income stream of I may sell the access to other companies. There's a hospital in California where they paid the ransom after 7 days of being down. No CT scans, couldn't dispatch ambulances, etc. 30 days later, they get hit again, not by the same group. So there's a little bit there, maybe of a blank if you do and a blank if you don't.
Yep.
I'll let the audience fill in the words there, kind of thing. But if we even go further, so there's that piece. Sometimes selling access later, even selling the maps of the network, as well as the data exfiltration piece. So at the point where you get hit, I mean, there's two big questions, like how quickly can I restore, but then also what's the value of the data that's been stolen. But you may or may not be. I mean, we go back to Sony, right? This is keep me honest here. 5 years ago, maybe I need more caffeine, but and that was where they went more of what's the value of the data. There have been multiple cases, where the attackers will go and try to sell to competitors. So far, knock on wood, have not heard of any competitor actually willing to do that, and some have notified the competitor whose information they're being offered, of what's going on. That actually makes a lot of sense as a liability reason, because like the last thing you would want is to get caught doing that. So just morality, good, yes, I hope, and also some good economic motivators. Like, I'm not going to buy the IP of my competitor. That's asking for it. A little bit of karma, maybe, kind of thing. There's then even going a little further sometimes in how they're attacking once inside the environment, like you mentioned. A couple other details there are kick off the encryption. I think we all know we should automate and orchestrate things, right? And, have them all policy driven. So you see some of that, like, if you get access to domain admin credentials, kicking off encryption on hundreds, maybe thousands of devices at a time. And even, this is just like, still kind of geeking out a little bit, sometimes not even doing it, so there's already stuff going on in parallel, but even on a single machine or a single set of data, encrypting the first 3 to 5 meg, kind of a lazy encryption, if you will, then jump to the next file, then jump to the next file, then jump to the next file. That's how you can start to get, like, within 15 to 30 minutes, you can be in a lot of trouble. Because if you've got, I don't know, let's go back to the SQL Server database example. If someone's encrypted the first 5 meg of your MDF file, you may or may not be able to get any value out of the entire, next gig or terabytes of that actual data file, kind of thing. And they're able to do that, very, very quickly. I'll often also recommend that people look at NTP, and of course your authentication, authorization, and logging. So this is the classic AAA stuff, authentication, authorization, logging. So if I'm someone who wants to really make it hard for you to find patient 0, because that's what you need to do in an incident response, go find patient 0, find all the systems they got access to, as you're also bringing back the data before the point of encryption. If I want to make that very, very hard, I'm going to mess with your logging. I'm going to mess with the concept of time, which is almost like now we're like metaphysical, like what day is it really? Are we living in the matrix or not kind of thing? But if they can mess with time and the key sources of time, that can blow up so many things. It's not even funny. So it's a little bit of like your data's messed up, and then we'll just blow up lots of other surrounding things to make it so hard for you just to think clearly to recover that you don't have a choice but to pay a ransom.
Yeah. What about, prevention and mitigation strategies? I mean, obviously, the big thing in ransomware is just recovery, from a backup, from a known good backup, right? I mean, but as you've indicated, there are a lot of problems and challenges with that. If you're recovering one machine, that may be practical. If you're recovering an entire data center, probably not going to get you up and running in the time frame that you need to get running. So what do you see as things that people could have in their toolkit to kind of prevent getting really clobbered by this?
I used to be responsible for security on the customer side. So this is at an overarching level. This is a defense in-depth conversation, right? It should be. There is going to be a last line of defense we'll get to shortly, but I don't want you or me or anyone else to be on my last line of defense every single day. Like there should be layers above that block a good bit of what's going on. So what I'll often, and then the other piece there is channeling a little bit of the, not losing my IT operations soul, is that if we have too many layers, it can be a case of diminishing returns, or sometimes even a little bit of a barking chihuahua syndrome, right? Kind of thing. If you get because I never had an IPS system that I didn't tune very well. They created so many emails. I made an auto file rule and didn't look at it as often as I should have. I mean, that definitely was not me 15 years ago, right? Kind of thing. So when we think about this, we get too many layers that they may actually be worse than if we didn't put some of them. So thinking about the operational overhead first. In those, there's a lot of different things out there. There's great stuff from NIST. There's some charts that are amazingly wonderful and make my head hurt because they're so complex. The way that I usually boil it down it's what I can keep in my head at least, is I think about it from kind of a before the attack and after the attack. And so before the attack, focusing on the human aspect. This is really about education, good behavior. Don't enable macros if you don't know who the email's from. If I get an email from Charlie Giancarlo, who's my CEO, he emails me directly just about never, right, kind of thing. I should be careful about sending him some confidential information from Workday to his personal email for a board meeting, kind of thing. It just is happening now. Like, okay, think about that stuff. Next, though, before the attack from a technical standpoint, this is a ginormous, is that a technical word? Like enormous, ginormous landscape.
I mean, if Google's a word, so is ginormous.
Yeah, GOOGOL, the original Google before, right, kind of thing. So this is where I think about antivirus, patching, filtering, IDS, IPS, next-gen firewalls and threat detection systems. This is where, candidly, the signal-to-noise ratio in this space can be hard. You need to have good pieces in here, especially potentially more recently around next generation threat detection. Like, hey, there's an account executive who doesn't usually log into the domain controller. That's odd behavior. I had to flag that really quickly, kind of thing. But this is where, frankly, a good solutions integrator, value-added reseller, whatever you want to call it, that actually has a security practice is so critical because it's easy to get lost in the weeds here. Third, last one before the attack. Financial. This is interesting. I try to stay positive, right? I try to be more like, hey, we can find the things we can do that's worked out for me career-wise, all that kind of thing. But when it comes to insurance and cybersecurity insurance, I think it's easy for all of us to be maybe a little bit cynical because we look at insurance companies. They're in the business of writing policies. They're not in the business of paying claims. That's not what they do. So there's fine print. So often the cybersecurity insurance policies will have fine print around, are you up to date and patched as of the time of the attack? So let me go back 10 plus years. If you asked me as a data center architect, is everything in your data center patched and up to date and hardened as of right now?
Sure.
That's an extremely uncomfortable question. Like, let's talk about, I don't know, I think we were saying, let's talk about whatever ice cream sandwich that you had for lunch. I'd rather talk about that than, something else. So there is fine print around that. And that's actually part of why it's so hard to slow down attacks, because we have all these layers in the data center. But
and the fact that insurance is actually giving people more incentive to pay, which is also encouraging more attacks too. So it's sort of like a vicious cycle, but you may need it. So
potentially, there's actually one attack scenario in the news where they were starting to negotiate with the attackers, and the attacker said, "Hey, we read your 10K. This is what good people do in sales and business development. Like, we read about your company, and we see that you have a $10 million cybersecurity insurance policy. What are you doing, like putzing around with the $1 million offer? Pay up." Basically was the conversation kind of thing. There are some of the insurance companies, though, that will have, this is now the flip side positive, lists of approved vendors to help, and vetted vendors to help with the recovery. So they'll be more likely to pay out on your policy. I'm not talking about paying rents, but just paying you to cover your policy, as well as even to knowing what you need to disclose from a legal and a financial public standpoint. That's very, very helpful information. Yeah. Or even potentially recommending breach coaches. Story about CIOs or CISOs that have almost literally gone numb. Like, just you try and think about, what if it were you and you're the CISO for a Fortune 500 and you got this call, like fight or flight reaction, like
I'm sorry, I can't help you right now. I've got to work on my resume.
My printer's out of toner. Got to fix that real fast.
I got a lot of resumes to print.
So that's before the attack, and I don't want to be just up front. The reason I talk about this, and actually inside Pure, a part of the day job, train people on this, is because I want to make very clear there is not a silver bullet here. This is a complex, hard scenario. What we do as Pure helps, but there's a lot of other stuff you ought to be doing here. And then, of course, there is the last one, which is after the attack. We're technical. And you already, I appreciate you mentioning it. We've got to think about backups. We've got to think about recovery, scale of recovery, and speed of recovery. And there's even this little bit of a fun kind of philosophical discussion there, if we can dare go there. So we all have backups.
We love philosophy here.
The philosophy here is a little bit of we know we should all have backups, and you don't need anyone to tell us that. But if that's the case, like we're just done this conversation because we know about backups, and done that. The philosophical part of it is when we think about the idea of risk, and often I would do this as part of business impact analysis consulting work. Take applications, put them in tiers. What's the downtime cost? How much data can you lose? RPO. How long does it take to come back online? RTO. Okay, fine. Then you evaluate risk with that, especially around likelihood and around impact, or maybe probability and impact. So we think about, how do we protect against a high impact but low probability scenario? You may be getting attacked every day, and attackers are trying to get in, but you're hopefully not like your last line of defense recovering from backups every day. So the one thing I know is that if your last line of defense requires day-to-day care and feeding, it's not going to be there when we need it. We got all this other stuff to do every day. We got new projects coming in. We got new people coming in. We've got, we've got support tickets and all this stuff. So it actually goes into some of the architectural concepts that I talk about around recovery, about simplicity and reliability and speed.
There's a couple things you talked about there that are really important. I want to highlight the fact that you mentioned like business impact analysis, and an understanding risk in this scenario, I think, is really really important, and the prioritization of systems, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's a big one too. And I also was thinking, you were talking about we were talking about the ransom piece of it and insurance, but one of the things that I did note that the asking price for the ransom is typically substantially higher than what they actually end up paying out. And I think that, one thing, if you do find yourself in that scenario, is there are good ransomware negotiators now. That's a whole business.
It is.
The whole economy, whole ecosystem's risen around this. So it does seem that, that would be, if you are in the place where you're going to end up paying, that might be a really good investment. It'll pay for itself, I guess, right? Because there is a negotiation opportunity there.
Some of the things I think of that, there are negotiators. It's very interesting to think about, and maybe we can go back to a little bit old school, maybe Al Capone, et cetera, kind of thing. Whoever has these linkages, how do they have them? And whose side are they really on? not trying to create fear, or I'm not even pushing back against what you mentioned. Like, you're absolutely right. They're out there, but evaluating why they're in that position and how they know what they know, kind of thing, to be real.
Yeah. Well, you should definitely check references.
There are also, like we mentioned, literally breach coaches.
Yeah.
This is where hopefully the free advertising is all right. But one of the preeminent firms in this space is Mandy and FireEye. They're actually splitting out the technology and the consulting. They do a great amount of work on this. But then there's a lot of other business partners that we have that do great stuff here. We're literally coming in and trying to identify patient zero. One distinction I'll make, though, is it's interesting, is often a negotiator for a ransom will usually almost always not be the same company as is coming in to help you do incident response, find patient zero and chart it through. Is also usually a separate company that would come in and help you with the recovery and the tools around the actual recovery kind of thing. So it's like, hey, one person helps you negotiate, the other person is helping you find, what systems you need to clean out or change credentials on, but another one is the one that's actually helping do the changes of the credentials and cleaning out rootkits and bringing stuff back. So there is a chain of a value chain here because there's enough complexity in the recovery scenario that there's different groups focused on different things in the good legal ways, aside from the more nefarious side of it.
Yeah. Well, what I've in my experience, when a company gets hit, it's an all hands on deck kind of endeavor.
So as Pure, we partner with a good number of companies, especially in the backup and recovery space. So this is Commvault, Veeam, Veritas, Rubrik, Cohesity, et cetera. I'm not trying to play favorites here, multiple of them. And many of those companies have various capabilities when it comes to recovery, when it comes to cleaning out data as it comes back in partnership with antivirus firms, et cetera, kind of thing. But you're right. It's an all hands on deck because there's no, here's the easy answer. Just unfortunately not.
So if a customer says, well, we're all in the cloud. So, AWS or Microsoft, whoever, not playing favorites, we're in the cloud. So, their security is going to be better than mine, right? And that could be that's been a perception for many customers. How does ransomware? What's the role of ransomware when your information is in the cloud versus on-prem?
So I'd say there's some changes at the kind of the edges of the scenarios, but not to the core threat. So if we jump to the end, I'm trying to think of the Twitter account that is for like S3 open buckets, kind of thing. It's the Twitter hall of shame of like this company and this company and this company with the S3 open buckets. Is that Amazon's fault? Not at all. There can be a higher general security profile in the cloud, but there's still users getting into it. Otherwise, you're not using it. There's still data there. You still have to enable remote access. The fundamentals of what attackers are doing don't necessarily change regardless of on-prem, colo, get a cage in a data center in the cloud, because we've got some of the same building blocks. Now, the penetration methods may change. The types of applications may shift, but at core, it's still users and data. And this is now not, I'm not diminishing any of the cloud security services, but if we think about how attackers usually get into an environment, they get in through me and through you. And we are the same people as admins and engineers using the cloud resources as we're using it in our data center. And encryption doesn't really care about the kind of data. It's encryption. Or as long as you have something that you can write to and access and delete, it still applies. So there's some help there, but fundamentally the same dynamics in play.
So then, would it be fair to say that the impact domain is larger in that case? Because let's just say someone, I breach through my PC, get onto a shared service, in the cloud. Now, if I was a hacker, wouldn't the potential for even bigger impact and bigger ransom be to attack the cloud providers then?
So yes, at least so far, we have not seen, and this is where I'm being careful. I'm stepping out a little bit on a limb, but trying to follow the question here. Have not seen cloud level compromises at an overall AWS, Azure, GCP, because they're at their services level. They are fanatically focused on security. And I'd actually argue that even in the cases, sometimes this is almost a little bit of a version of sometimes where we have stability conversations about cloud services kind of thing. Often, any given cloud provider is going to run at a higher stability level than if I ran my own data center. I might not have the problem they happen to have, but their business is in taking those lower level pieces. Now, the point you made there is that I think about if it's on-prem, but in the cloud, because it could be, Azure Active Directory too, the equivalent of domain admin credentials, or the core of the master AWS account. Man, that's going to be a target. And in some cases, even there are cases where there have been defeats of MFA, multi-factor type stuff. Sometimes this is via pin spoofing. Maybe it's via a temporary policy on new devices. I'm not trying to give tips to bad actors out there, but they know this stuff better than I do. So even if we think about MFA in that scenario, sometimes that gets beat, which goes a little bit to the kind of the dark story of if a bear is chasing you, you don't need to run faster than the bear. You just need to run faster than your friend. Yes. So right. As long as you're a higher security profile than a lot of the other organizations out there, that's probably because if someone's really determined to get in, especially state actors, like we go back to SolarWinds, they'll probably get in somehow. Being very practical.
And you mentioned SolarWinds. One of the big targets for the SolarWinds breach was Microsoft, and so we don't really fully understand what the potential implications of that. And when you talk about, breaching the cloud provider, that is a very scary scenario. And it's not without precedence, because in the early days of this, we did see some of these, smaller boutique kind of cloud providers that were providing virtualization services or, shared servers and things like that. I mean, we saw several times where those, they popped everything and, encrypted everything, and, people lost everything in some of those scenarios. So, you talk about, high impact, low probability events, that is certainly one. And the other thing I think that we've seen a bit too is that SaaS providers are getting popped.
Yes.
And that is another area where, as somebody consuming that SaaS service, you have to be protective of your data in that scenario as well, right?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Again, so many stories, but one of them, there's a smaller boutique-ish. So if we look in the world of medicine, there's been a lot of consolidation, especially from a doctor practice and hospital standpoint. There's still lots of small dentists out there. The dentist that I go to is still his own company. He's been there for a while, or practice, doing it for a while. There was a dental software as a service provider that had a couple thousand customers. They got compromised centrally, and then the monetization method for the attacker wasn't to go after the software as a service company. They went after all the individual customers of the software as a service company, saying we have your data, we will release certain things. If you don't do it, we will not give it back to your provider for you to even export unless you pay us, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that work then? Just last question. It's if just in the hypothetical scenario that they breach a cloud provider, but it's a shared environment. So let's just say that it's impacting 12, 15, 20 customers or whatnot. Then how does that ransom process work?
We go back to this is the intersection of economics and finance and technology and psychology. It's going to be a follow the money, and where's the greatest monetization potential at the least amount of risk. So if you look at that, does the cloud provider, how much money do they have? How much do the individual customers have? Are they in regulated industries? Basically, where can I get the most amount of money for the least amount of risk and time? And that's where I'm going to follow. So I know I'm answering that with a little bit of you asked me a question, I give you a formula, but it's what comes to mind.
Well, if you think about it, you have access to, 30 companies. You can just encrypt them one at a time and just work it like any other breach. It's just you have the keys to the front door of the office building that they're in.
Yeah, it just seems like to me, some customers might say, the cloud provider has better security and they've done a better job securing our data, but at the same time, do I want to actually control my data more? And not let a cloud provider have access to my data and make those decisions on my behalf. I don't know. I guess this is all kind of
and I think there's two parts to that. I mean, when you're talking about platform as a service, where you're looking at SaaS applications or something like that, then you are kind of entrusting that company to manage your data. But if you're consuming cloud resources, for your platform, right, then you're the one in charge of loading your data in and using your data and doing all those things. So There's nobody who's going to be safeguarding that except for you. You have to do that. There's no alternative for that. So
there's a key item here, and I think we're wandering around. It makes me think of the term data sovereignty.
Yeah.
And to what degree do I have control of my data, both in the sense of controlling who can access it, but even, and now we're in some cloud conversations, this is another part of my job, so I think about it, but also in terms of if I can't move my data around quickly enough, I don't really control it, kind of thing. And now we're into data gravity. And those are not fun conversations because they're hard. They're really hard.
They are. Well, and since we're talking about the data and gravity of it and all that, I want to turn it back around and talk about Pure Storage, because I think
Thank you.
there's a reason why you're a subject matter expert at Pure, and you guys have some interesting solutions for addressing the recovery piece of it.
So where I usually go is I like to start with kind of architectural principles. Now they're ones that I talk about how Pure fulfills them, but still, because hopefully these are principles that anyone can apply to an environment, whether they're a Pure customer or a future Pure customer, kind of thing, right? So the first one is around, and there's really two here. The first one is about fundamentally, do I have my data? Kind of thing, if I'm in recovery mode. That's about the factors that go into that are simplicity, reliability. So if my means of data protection, whatever they are, is really complicated to set up and it requires lots of daily overhead and operation, it's not going to be there if I need it. If those means can be compromised by attackers in general, or to the hard scenario, more recent, of if they get admin credentials to my storage systems, backup servers, etc., maybe they can't modify it because they delete it or trash it in some way. So all that goes into, do I have my data, fundamentally. The second part, though, is it's a newer one, and we were alluding to this earlier, and it's almost painful to think about. Let's say I do all this time and work in architecture and products, etc., on having my data, simplicity and reliability. If I can't bring it back within days to weeks to months, does it count? Does all that effort count? So I'm thinking of a customer where they were on another system, leaving the names out, and actually relatively modern-ish stuff. They got hit by ransomware before they became a Pure customer, and they started restoring about 60% of their environment, 60 plus. It was a progress bar, kind of Windows progress bar style, count up. And at the point where it got to about 55 to 60 days, they just canceled it. Because if we go back to our RTO conversation, that's not where the RTO is in days or weeks. It's more just like RTO equals no, or forget about it kind of thing. It's like the answer is it's not happening in anything that matters.
Yeah.
So when I dive into kind of unpacking those from a Pure standpoint, I'll often talk about what I call the trifecta, just because that's a fun word to say with a little bit of emphasis. But it goes into the first part of that is we think about before the attack, something that needs to be very simple to implement and operate. The core there is being real. You probably knew we were going to get here if you're listening, and I know you do, is around snapshots and around how Pure does snapshots on both. It can be for backup data or primary data. Anything living on Pure, it can be your primary application data it's what I like to call what snapshots want to be when they grow up. You can make thousands of them. You can make them instantly. There's no performance impact. They're point-in-time copies that are always and have been and are and always have been. Say it 5 times fast. Immutable. Once you create it as a point-in-time, protection point, it cannot be modified. So that then goes into we think about, so say during the attack, so that's kind of before the attack, I can have easy snapshots. And sometimes we have fun conversations about crash consistency versus not. In the case of an attack, you'll basically take any data source you can get. Crash consistent, application consistent, fine, especially with modern data systems. Okay, right. And sometimes we have long conversations about that. The next piece then gets into during the attack. So during the attack, can an attacker compromise it? So there, I already mentioned immutability. So if you have, your primary data or your backup data, maybe not all of your backup data, 5 or 7 or 14 days, whatever, living on Pure systems, whether it's FlashArray or FlashBlade, that the snapshots are immutable of the data. And 2, even if someone compromises the admin credentials on a Pure system, we have this almost kind of elegantly simple layer that we call safe mode on top of the snapshot or the data deletion process. I'm sometimes a little bit vague about this in public formats because attackers are smart and they do research. But on Pure, it's documented. Deleting data on Pure is a two-step process. It always has been. So it's originally for the admin get out of jail free card. You deleted something and you didn't really mean to, because I never did that, right? But it's like, so usually you delete data on Pure and it stays around for 24 hours unless you manually do that second step immediately, because like, I'm out of space, I need it back right now. We've added protections around the second step of that deletion process where you cannot force that even if you have local credentials on the system, admin credentials. And we even extend out some of the timers once you do that working with our support teams. That can't be changed by you. You can call into Pure support. We have pieces that I'm absolutely going to leave out about how we authenticate and authorize those conversations, kind of thing. But the key there is to say, even if someone gets admin credentials to a Pure system with primary data or backup data, as long as there's snapshot points in there, the attacker can't trash them. Third, follow some of the conversation after the attack. After the attack, we got to figure out patient zero. That's outside of the domain of what Pure does, just to be very real. But then we're into how quickly can I restore? Well, if it's primary application data on a Pure system, you can roll back terabytes, petabytes off of pointer-based snapshots like this. Now, you probably should clone it up into a isolated network environment, change credentials, clean out rootkits, maybe do that multiple times because you can clone snapshots really fast. Or maybe you've got Pure behind a backup system. And now we can talk about, we actually had a great blog post on our website modeling out a little bit of a lab queen scenario, but it was real, about showing scenarios where even out of backup systems, we could drive up to a petabyte per day of restore, which are crazy numbers. We actually needed 7 storage arrays on the front end to be able to take what the FlashBlade system on the back end could pump through. And those are fun numbers to talk about, but that starts to dramatically shift the recovery from something that, do I have my data? Has it been compromised? Can I restore it quickly enough to matter? It really starts to flip those around. So that's where you mentioned talking about this for a while, or we both did. Each of those things matter in the event of recovery, and the combination of those is critical. You take out the speed of recovery, the other stuff doesn't matter. You take out the ability to keep an attacker from trashing the backup files, all the pre-work and the speed of recovery don't matter. So the combination of those together, I'll say trifecta again. That's why I like to say that.
Well, I want to go back to the piece about, the business impact analysis side of things and taking a risk-based approach to your systems. And, while some people may be saying, well, geez, storing all my backups on, like a tier 1 storage device could get pretty expensive. If you prioritize, maybe not everything lives there, but the things that are going to ruin your business if you can't recover them quickly, maybe that's what sits there, right? And maybe you just make that investment, because that investment is going to be a lot cheaper than the investment you're going to have to make on the other end if things go wrong, right?
Almost the most common question I get from folks is like, you told me attackers are in for weeks or months. Do I need to keep that much on primary system snapshots or in my backups and on flash really fast to restore? It's like, so good, that makes sense, but the catch is to take ransomware out of the picture. In any scenario, could we roll a business back 6 or 8 weeks, like the whole data of the business? We'd go out of business practical. If we. Yeah, so it becomes we look at that point of encryption, the point of infiltration. We need that for analyzing patient zero and finding what they got into. The point of encryption, and that's usually, you notice that within hours, within a day or two, because your applications aren't working, and that's the point that we target from a retention standpoint on the faster recovery method, whatever that is, whether it's on the backup tier or the primary data tier. And if you have space efficient, pointer based, deduplicated, compressed snapshot technology, which we happen to have, that actually makes the economics, there's cost there, but it makes the economics viable for customers versus just being like, that's only for the Fortune 100 or the global financials or that kind of thing.
Well, and I would think that's also another great indicator that you've been compromised when all of a sudden those inexpensive pointer-based snapshots are not so inexpensive right. anymore, because they're all encrypted and everything is, there's no data reduction there, right? That's a problem.
There's one customer we had where their first indication they got, this is a while back now, they usually ran it around 65% full or so. And the first notification they got on a weekend was that the array that was, they knew what their headroom was and how quickly it was going to grow on average. It popped to 80%. and they got a space alert from the Pure system. And that was the very first notification they got, because they had other alerting tools. Okay. That was the first notification they got of like, what in the world between Friday evening and Saturday morning would pop my Pure array 2 years worth of headroom growth, kind of thing. There's got to be something going on, because it's all unique data that doesn't reduce at all.
What's next for ransomware, and what's next for Pure and trying to deal with that?
So at a ransomware standpoint, gut feel. So if I have a crystal ball, I'll go play the stock market, and we probably wouldn't be here together. Is that there's going to be continuing focus on supply chains and potentially on data exfiltration. I don't know how we solve the data exfiltration question, just to be candid, because once it goes outside your network and they're essentially holding you hostage at a exposure standpoint. So we may just see a lot less privacy in the world. I think there was a great thing back from I think Eric Schmidt at Google said you shouldn't write anything down that you don't want to be public at some point. We might be wandering to that kind of a world almost.
Yeah.
The supply chain one, though, is hard, because you think about, can you really vet the binary code of every single vendor or product that you have in your environment? Just no.
Yeah.
And that then, for me, at a Pure level, Pure Storage level, that's where I think, while there's going to continue to need to be focus on the before the attack layers of defense, it's only going to become increasingly common to focus on the after the attack speed of recovery, because it won't be this necessarily black mark if you get hit by ransomware, because it's going to happen, but you can't have it be so revenue impacting that you go out of business. I'm thinking of one. It's a Fortune 500, small enough town. You know the name if I said it. Their headquarters, they got hit, and there were DR backups, snapshots taken offline. They had to go back to tape. 3+ month recovery process, and the statement is that if they had that kind of recovery process happen again, they'll be out of business. Now, in those company terms, it's probably not out of business. It's that you're sold off for parts to your competitors, kind of thing. Via,
right.
So some M&A teams or private equity kind of thing. So I think there's going to be this continuing focus on fast recovery. As Pure, we're investing here around, we have a richness of data, what you alluded to earlier, about the reducibility of the data, the uniqueness of the data, even some of the patterns. I'm actually fortunate Pure has a very healthy patent program. My name's on 5 patents that are in various stages of being filed on some of the early-ish detection around data patterns and patterns of compromise and notifying. We even recently added in Pure One, which is our kind of online management platform, a dashboard that gives you indication of the health of your systems from a cyber recovery standpoint. We're adding more things into that over time, not to rub people's faces in it, but we're pretty sure you like the idea of being able to look at your whole fleet and see the levels of protection that you've got across the board with some of the technologies that we talked about.
Yeah. So then what's next for you in all this?
So it's, you said I had someone inside
besides
Pure
making patents.
Yeah. They said are you worried that you're becoming too much Mr. Ransomware? And I was like, maybe, because I do more than that, and I find that interesting. But at the same time, I'm not sure that's all that bad a title to have, given what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah.
So I think there is just, at least this still feeds a little bit of my my technical soul. And there's a great quote about we've never arrived. We're always a learner. We're always continually learning. I think we're not in. There are two kinds of people. Either you've got to learn a ton of new stuff, and it's like, ooh, that's exciting, or you got to learn a ton of new stuff. Whew. The latter one probably going to have a career in IT be challenging, because the definition of what we do is there's always more stuff.
No doubt.
So at this point, I'm still, frankly, really enjoying what I'm doing and diving into this at Pure. I'm in a semi-defined role. So I have some specific responsibilities, but actually a good bit of latitude to do stuff like this. And every day is a little bit different.
That sounds awesome. And, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on and giving us some good info on the ransomware threat, because I know I get asked about it constantly. It is so at the top of mind for so many executives in companies these days. And anything we can do to help them out a little bit, I think, is going to be very welcome. So I really appreciate you coming on today and giving us a knowledge dump. Thanks so much for being on.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for watching. Love to see your thoughts and questions in the comment section below. And if you like what you saw, please click on that like button, hit that subscribe button, because that helps the channel a lot. And if you want to be notified, click on that bell icon and you'll get those notifications. And I will see you in the next video.